News flash, the Penguin is over, episode 8 has dropped, and now I can confidently say that the show is 3 hours of good television, stretched to meet an 8-hour order. Things do get off to a promising start. If you've seen the show, you'll know that in the very first scene, Oz kills Alberto, who is the brother of Sophia and the son of crime boss Carmine. There's now a power vacuum in Gotham, and Oz wants his piece. Roll title card, and so far so good. But then we get introduced to Victor, who is played by Renzi Feelers. Oz is about to kill him, and then sees something in Victor that makes him back off. Instead, Oz makes a complete U-turn and takes Victor under his wing. Talk about a 360-degree change of mind. Of course, this is just a neat narrative trick to propel the story forwards. Victor is young, impressionable, out of his depth, and unlike the other people in this world. He's, in a sense, the viewer, and so he's going to be used as a vehicle for exposition, and also a character whose downfall we might plausibly witness. Not exactly original. First, he will lose his moral compass, then start to commit crimes, and then, of course, meet his ultimate fate, probably at the hands of his mentor. This is the roadmap I had in my head from the very first episode, and it proved to be 100% accurate, right up to and including Victor's death. That death, of course, has got the internet talking. People are shocked. How could Oz do it? Well, that's sort of my question exactly. How and why would Oz do it? For me, this is an example of the writers wanting to create shock factor at the expense of the character's logical motivations. The very fact that I predicted it would happen tells you what a cliche it is. It's an example of rote, cliched writing that is thinking too much about the audience's reaction and too little about what the characters would realistically do. I was actually struck when watching that scene how closely it mirrored the Sopranos' handling of Chrissy's death. In The Sopranos, Tony suffocates Chrissy, his supposed cousin, and one of his closest allies. The difference is that we've watched Tony try to keep Chrissy on the straight and narrow for 60 hours of television. In a sick kind of way, getting Chrissy out of the picture actually makes sense. But in The Penguin, Oz killing Victor doesn't make sense. Victor is nothing but loyal, on the straight and narrow, and willing to please. Now, I'm sure people will say, well, Oz is evil. Even if he is evil, people are led by incentives. Oz's incentive to kill Victor doesn't add up. A smaller point on the topic of Victor, casting-wise, Renzi Feelers never really made sense to me. Looking at him, looking at Oz, it was as if they were from two different TV shows. Now, I know Victor is supposed to be innocent, but something about his look just made Oz appear overly cartoonish. Perhaps a slightly older looking actor with a slightly more grizzled face would have suited the world better. Renzi looks far too clean-cut for someone who is supposed to have endured Gotham's housing estate in Crown Point. Then we get to pacing, one of my major gripes with the show. What is it with the idea that prestige television has to slow down the pace? That doesn't make a show better or more highbrow. Why do we need elaborate flashbacks? What happened to showing, not telling? What happened to leaving things to the imagination? Do we need to see how Victor's family died, or how Sophia spent her time in Arkham, or long drawn-out scenes of Oz as a child? Honestly, the number of flashback scenes in this show is ridiculous. Just as a storyline is getting good, the episode ends, and then the next episode starts back in like 1960. Episode 2 ends, we start with a flashback in episode 3. Episode 3 ends on a cliffhanger, we get an hour-long flashback in episode 4. Episode 6 ends, we start episode 7 with a flashback. Episode 7 ends, and even the finale starts with a long bout of historical exposition. Yes, the writers are desperate to let us know that Oz is wicked and his mother knew all along. Who cares? This is a fantasy world, which brings me to my biggest problem with The Penguin. It's trying too hard. This is an adaptation of a comic book character. Trying to make a serious story fit within those confines leads to inevitable problems. You can't have your cake and eat it. You can't dole out fan service on one hand and try and tell a serious, plausible tale on the other. You can't make every character irredeemably cartoonishly bad and then try to make us care about them. Take the relationship with Oz and his mother, Frances. This is again a direct rip-off of The Sopranos. The difference is that in The Sopranos, Tony and his mother Livia have a relationship that feels real. That's because so much of The Sopranos is grounded in domestic triviality. Half the things that Tony and Livia fight about are completely meaningless, just like real life. In The Penguin, the stakes are so high all the time, and the characters are so obviously extreme, that it's impossible to put yourself in their shoes. The same goes for the city. I mean, we're looking at a city so depraved that it could only have come from a comic book. That's fine, it's a comic book adaptation. So stop taking yourself so seriously. It doesn't all need to be dark. Even Nolan's Batman movies had pockets of light. A perfect illustration of this problem is the episode we get halfway through the show where we have to watch Sophia in Arkham. Her experience is so extreme that it simply does not resemble real life. Again, that's fine, but you can't aim to tell a convincing, character-driven story when the characters in the world they inhabit don't feel believable. Sophia, of course, gets out of Arkham and then murders her entire family. So she's a murdering psychopath. Her father was a murdering psychopath. Presumably her brother was too. Oz definitely is. Her psychiatrist is off the reservation. I mean, all these people are just extreme. It's plausible, perhaps, to have one nutcase in a story, but when every major character is absolutely beyond the pale, well, obviously except for Victor, then you've got problems. Finally, the Penguin underscores how weak it is in its very last episode. It starts ostensibly with Oz in a position of real weakness, but ends with him literally kingpin of the city. He essentially achieves this ascension in about 20 minutes. He bribes a city official, rival gang members are killed off in a throwaway montage, Sophia is sent back to Arkham. I mean, any of these plot points in a better show would have been explored over at least 2 or 3 episodes. The bribing of the city official is particularly egregious. Oz just waltzes into a government building and sits in a judge's chair in court and gets what he wants. Again, you can say, well, it's just a comic book show. So why isn't it embracing that fact? For me, The Penguin would have been a lot more effective if it was half the runtime and it had focused a lot more on Oz in the present. None of these point of view switches, none of this tiresome exposition. Oz is clearly the most interesting character in the show, and he's clearly at the most interesting point in his life, so let us watch him. I guess I feel that The Penguin is trying to be the next Sopranos, rather than just a slice of good old-fashioned escapism. I wish it had been more like Reacher, for instance, which knows exactly what it is. Reacher is male machismo writ large, it feels good, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek in places. The Penguin, on the other hand, is just trying too hard. It looks nice, it's well acted in parts, and Farrell is a good lead. But I think this era of self-seriousness in Hollywood needs to come to an end.